Okay, so hello everyone. You're welcome to tune in at any point of this live stream, but we're gonna go ahead and get started. So we have Amanda Richardson from Action Cerebral Palsy join us for our first series in conversations with charities. So I'm gonna hand over to Amanda to introduce her charity and explain a little bit about the purpose and their mission. Welcome, Amanda. Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you, Anna, and it's really lovely to have the opportunity to tell you a little bit about our work. Action Cerebral Palsy came about as a result of a group, really, of charities that work with children with cerebral palsy, originally just to look at how we can improve provision across the country, and we became a national charity which focuses on raising the profile of cerebral palsy and looking at influencing policy and practice across the UK, so that all children can get the very best start in life, with a particular focus really on early intervention and pathways of care. So we are really interested in hearing from parents, but also representing the needs of families of children with cerebral palsy. We've had some really good success over the last few years. We launched really our charity with a parliamentary inquiry in which we heard from many parents, professionals and stakeholders involved in the world of cerebral palsy, which really was the start of our work, and have subsequently gone on to carry out surveys across the country about provision, freedom of information, and have launched these in Parliament, really with the aim of making parliamentarians and policymakers aware of the challenges faced by children with cerebral palsy and their families. And I think we've done this to a certain degree, but clearly the last few years have been pretty, there's been quite a lot of turmoil in terms of new elections and new governments, but we feel we are really flying the flag, I hope, a little bit for our families in a situation, in the charity world, where we're not really aware of any other organisation which specifically is a voice for children with cerebral palsy. We know Scope used to be that voice, and they still are to a certain extent, but they're now
they've spread out a little bit. Yeah, they cover too many things at the same time, I feel like.
Yeah. So we're very small.
Yeah, sorry, you touched upon your mission, but to clearly kind of state that you aim to improve the identification, intervention, and impact of the cerebral palsy community. Could you kind of elaborate on what that means to anyone who might not be familiar with your charity?
So yes, the campaign Identify, Intervene, Impact is based on the knowledge that we have about the vital importance of the early years of the child and the developing brain. Now, cerebral palsy is a neurological condition that is a result of damage to the developing brain before, during, and sometimes after birth, but has ongoing impact as the child develops and grows, and has quite a significant effect on the child's ability to move normally. So one of the earliest signs are sort of abnormal tones, abnormal movements, or children missing their motor milestones. But because motor and movement is so intrinsic to development, of child development generally, it will have an impact on the child's ability, for example, to play, possibly communicate, to learn in the ways that a child with normal development would learn about the world around them. So our identification, intervene, impact is all about capturing and identifying children with those signs of cerebral palsy as early as possible, so that they can be referred onwards to for intervention, which we know is very effective in mitigating future challenges. So that really is key.
But what advice would you give parents who are not familiar with, different milestones that they can track? Because early identification is up to parents. They don't necessarily have to, see doctors all the time. So can you kind of take us through some of the milestones that parents can track to help them identify cerebral palsy early on?
Yes, I would qualify this by saying, as all parents are told, children do develop at different rates. However, as a parent myself, I know that mums and dads have a sort of radar. They know when something's not right, and absolutely act on that. Act on that instinct that you have as a mother. If you feel that something is not quite right, or you have an anxiety about your child, please do take that anxiety further. The absolute sort of milestones which you should look for, and most children will achieve, will be, for example, 8 months, most children will be sitting up, pulling themselves up into a sitting position. They will be using all parts of their body quite actively by 1 year, and most children will be walking by 18 months. Some small indicators, some small signs that there might be something not quite right, and not necessarily cerebral palsy, but some developmental or motoric movement issues would be, for example, if a child favoured one side of their body more than the other, there was some neglect over one side, whether there was some differences in tone. So if the baby of the child or young child has is overly floppy, feels very floppy, or does not react to changes in position, that can also be a sign that something might not be quite right. And also general development, not tracking with their eyes, or following sounds, following movement, reaching out, all of those things that you would normally expect a baby to do. If there is some sense that child may attempt to make those movements but find that difficult, then that is the time to act. Don't delay. Just take advice and go and see your GP. Well, at the moment, we do have a health visiting service, and I know in some areas that service isn't quite as active as it used to be. But health visitors are also trained in picking up those signs. So please, if you've got a very young baby and you do feel things aren't quite right, please do mention that to your health visitor at the very first opportunity, or call your child development team and ask if you could have a chat. Act on your instinct, and don't be fobbed off, but pursue your anxieties until you feel comfortable.
Don't be in denial, basically, because many parents can reject the thought of that even being possible. So this is like one of your tips for parents who, they found out that their child might have cerebral palsy. Do you have any other tips, maybe like another top 3 for parents who just found out, they have no idea how to navigate that world? What should they do first thing?
Don't panic. Don't panic, because the natural thing is to think that gosh, what your life's been sort of turned into upside down. I think to be as informed as you can, to go and find that information, but be cautious of too much information. So find out the information that will help you. Think ahead, and think ahead, so that you can be proactive in making plans for your child. Take advantage of what's available on the internet, so go out and look at what support there is available. Your group, for example, other parents and other families will be an invaluable source of support and help and advice, and you are not alone. So the sense, I've worked with families with children with cerebral palsy for nearly most of my professional life, certainly for the past 25 years, and the most ongoing and I think the most valuable source of support for a lot of our families has been that peer support that they have got through other families. And my experience is that those families are so incredibly generous with their support, and they want to help others that are in this similar position. So yes, seek out information, be prepared and think ahead about what your child might need, not perhaps right now, but maybe in 6 months' time, 3 months, 6 months' time. Think about, and depending on the severity of your child's needs, but think about looking at an education, health and care plan as soon as you can. Really, that is the system through which your child will receive support as they enter the education system, and will also be a source of support to the social and health support as well. So look at the EHCP. Look at your local authority's website on special educational needs. This might sound premature for a baby or a young child, but knowledge is power, and the important thing is not to panic, to be calm, but to be prepared. And some of the things you will see and read, will not apply to you as a mum, but it might do. So be prepared, think ahead. And most important, and I cannot stress this enough, enjoy your child, enjoy your baby, because they will be developing in the most amazing ways, and enjoy their development. It may be slower than other children, but they will make progress, and they will bring an amazing an amazing experience to your life. So enjoy them and be positive and look forward to what your child will achieve through their life, which will be massive. Believe me, they will have a great life, and you are going to be such an important part of that. So be positive, be calm, be informed, and just enjoy your child.
Thank you so much for the advice. I think it's very valuable, and especially, you said that it's important to plan early and be prepared, but without actually stressing too much and freaking out so much.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely think about EHCP early on, even though you might think that your child is literally just 2 years old. It's important to know as much information as you can that's relevant to you. And also Amanda stressed that the community aspect is very important. And even if you live in a small town, many parents who reach out to us, they don't have the community resources available in person, so they cannot really find that many parents that they can relate to in person. But that's why we have the internet, and especially right now, make use of all the online community resources that you can, and Parent Suportal is one of them. But going back to the campaigning aspect, so you've been campaigning obviously since 2013, which is a very long time. So I'm interested to know, what have you learned about the CP community and the way policymakers treat the community?
There have been obviously many campaigns through other campaigning organisations, and who have, I think, shone a light on the challenges faced by families seeking just adequate, let alone good, but adequate support for their child with a disability. And I think if we've achieved anything specifically for families with cerebral palsy, is to raise knowledge about cerebral palsy, because it isn't. Yes, it presents as a motor, it presents as a movement disability, but actually it has those sort of it has an impact on all aspects of development. And I think people may, in the past, have thought of cerebral palsy purely as a physical disability, and it most certainly isn't. And it has a global impact on all aspects of development, or it can do. And that's another important thing to stress, is that each child with cerebral palsy will be unique in the way that they present. So I think hopefully we've raised the profile of cerebral palsy. Perhaps we've brought that to the attention of policymakers. I've spoken to people in Westminster about cerebral palsy, and they honestly haven't got a clue about it. You know, even though it's one of the most common disabilities, physical disabilities of childhood, you know, they really don't know very little. With all due respect to the campaigning charities for children with autism, which I think has been amazing, actually, and I'm in awe of. But I think perhaps children with cerebral palsy their needs are not as well known as those perhaps with other disabilities, and that's, I think it's really important that we share that information. So in terms of where we are and what we're achieving, I think we just keep knocking at that door and saying we need to move on here. There was a very important piece of work that was carried out by NICE, the National Institute of Clinical Guidance, on the guidelines and pathways for the management of children with cerebral palsy, actually 0 to 21, with a large range there. But in our latest piece of work, our latest research, in the report that we launched last year, earlier this year, carried out last year, we were really disappointed that a lot of regions in the UK have not really adopted to any extent the recommendations of the NICE guidelines on cerebral palsy, and that was extremely disappointing. And you know, we really want to ask government why that is. And our next piece of work will be to be asked some very specific questions as part of a parliamentary group to see how we can actually join the dots, where there are regions across the country where children and families with cerebral palsy actually have very good care, but also where that is not the case. So we have what we would call, you know, everybody uses the term a postcode lottery, but it is absolutely out there. You know, there's huge variations in care across the country, where families can have good care, but they can also areas where that care is by no means as good as it should and could be. Why? I think, you know, as we all know, we've been through a period of economic austerity where community health teams have had their budgets cut, and where important frontline staff such as health visitors, community therapists, paediatricians really struggled to provide an adequate service for their families, and also, you know, because perhaps as a knock-on effect of that, I think people's knowledge and understanding of the signs of cerebral palsy and the skill sets in the workforce perhaps again aren't perhaps as good as they could be in some areas and rather than others. So I think there's some work to be done on skill sets across healthcare and the education profession. And going back to what we were saying before about this crucial period between birth and 3, we talk about the first 1,001 days of a child's life being the sort of crucial time to pick up on developmental issues and act on them. And, you know, that's where we see the gaps. So often it takes far too long for a child to be diagnosed with cerebral palsy. It can be a long process, but actually the work and the intervention and the help and the therapy needs to start way beyond that moment of diagnosis. And in some cases it does, but it isn't intensive enough. There needs to be more. and it needs to be holistic. It needs to look not just at physiotherapy, for example, but it needs to look at the global developmental needs of that child in terms of their communication, their play, their social skills, their sensory skills, their ability to communicate and be with other children. So if we our sort of focus at the moment of the charity is really to say we all know what's wrong. We've identified that. We've highlighted that in our surveys and our reports. Now, please, can we get on and do something about that urgently? That's what we're doing now.
And you know, the statistic that you mentioned in your report, only 10% of NHS trusts being able to provide, you know, formal care pathways to children. And I found that like completely unimaginable. I couldn't believe the statistic. And you know, you just now mentioned that maybe it's austerity influencing the poor quality of medical staff and gaps in their education. So my question is, do you think that can only be changed if the overall healthcare policy moves from austerity to, you know, democratic allocation of funds to people's needs? Or, you know, perhaps you've seen some progress since you started campaigning with our current government. How are they responding to this gap in medical staff's education?
I can't really comment on medical staff's education. I know any medical any you know person working in health and therapy or medical support will be supportive of more training, and I think that a lot of people are sort of dealing with the essentials at the moment, and I think, and obviously with COVID, has that sort of also focused people's minds on the here and now. But you know, to answer your question about how do we spread you know, pathways of care across the country, the fact is that it is extremely shocking that statistic, and you know, I mean, our report was looking at the situation a couple of years ago, and there may have been some slight improvements since then, but I doubt it. But the important thing is that there are regions of the UK which do provide a good service. For example, we know that Scotland it's not perfect, but there is some examples of excellent practice and good pathways of care. And so we want to ask the question that if it's possible in one region or one of our devolved nations, why isn't that possible? Are there lessons to be learned? We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. And yes, there is a sense that we should be looking at pathways of care for all children with neurodevelopmental issues, which could be a unified pathways, but then which branches off according to individual needs. But where those children can access expertise in that particular disability or that particular developmental area, and for example, potentially looking at centres of excellence, regional centres of excellence, where families with children with cerebral palsy could go to get that really expert input and advice across all aspects of their child's development. But also, would it be possible to have that expertise locally as well as regionally, and what needs to be done? So I think there's some work there around looking at where best practice exists, demonstrating to the purse holders and policymakers that this could be possible, looking at that and then joining the dots and making sure that actually all children across the country can access the best possible intervention and care from people who really understand the nature of cerebral palsy. Because I think in like many disorders, there are a lot of generalist healthcare providers who will be doing a fantastic job, but may not really understand the true nature of cerebral palsy. And our little children really need to have access to those experts very quickly. So
it's
yeah.
mainly about kind of encouraging the Parliament to well, basically build those synergies between different parts of the country, and talking to experts much more, and incorporating voices that actually represent cerebral palsy and know about the disorder. And it's very interesting that you brought up Scotland, I think, as well. It just shows, again, the disparity between different parts of the country, which is very unfortunate. But as you mentioned, it can be fixed if they don't exist in silos from each other, and they actually establish those connections and share information. And I wanted to also ask you about your direct experience with parliamentarians. So how responsive are they? How motivated are they to promote the cause? How do they interact with you? What has your experience been with that?
Well, surprisingly positive. There will MPs will always have their area of interest, and there will be those who are particularly interested in disability or health or education, and will respond to requests for meetings to talk about our campaign. And I've never met an MP who hasn't said that they would be happy to help with the campaign. I think sometimes when you start to talk about, be controversial here, but when you start to talk about the NHS and funding and budgets and the way that NHS commissioning works, you sort of almost see the shutters come down, and it's a bit like this is a problem that's just too difficult to tackle. And so it's actually where we need to work now, I think, is to be sort of getting our parliamentary supporters to be asking those questions around NHS commissioning and to move beyond the rhetoric. So we all know government have produced amazing and spent huge amounts of money on very expensive reports around the Healthy Child Programme, which was quite big about 10 years ago, about early intervention. We all understand about the importance of early intervention. But can we please move on from everyone knowing about it and knowing how important it is to actually implementing it? So in my view, I think we really need to be asking some important questions and maybe have a bit of a shake-up around the whole idea of local commissioning, clinical commissioning teams, and the way that NHS England commissions services from our children's services and paediatric services, and see whether there is a way that we can do better. There's a lot of duplication that happens around commissioning, and a lot of services providing very similar services, but then very important provision just falling through the gap. So, with the help of our parliamentary supporters, which we want to gather from across the political spectrum, we want to be asking those questions and perhaps holding to account those individuals that are responsible for planning children's medical therapeutic services, I think, both locally and regionally, to make it more streamlined for all children with disabilities, but also to have the flexibility to really focus on individual clinical and developmental needs with specific disabilities. So I think we also, and again, this may sound a little bit controversial, but I think we somehow lost the sense of looking in detail at challenges, the detailed challenges that children exist, in favour of looking at that sort of, there's been rightly so, there's been a very strong focus on safeguarding, but actually a child with cerebral palsy or at risk of cerebral palsy or with symptoms of motor delay, that is could be potentially a safeguarding risk in terms of their well-being, by simply not addressing those clinical and developmental needs. So a young child who is not developing a communication system which adequately enables them to express themselves, or developing fine motor skills or gross motor skills, which they need to engage in the world and learn about the world around them and play and interact with their peers. Those physical and developmental issues are just as much as, in my view, a risk to their well-being as other safeguarding issues. So we need to look at those, the whole, the child as a whole, and I hope that by developing some expertise and knowledge and understanding of cerebral palsy as we go on, those children will get that early help that they need more quickly and more effectively.
And you mentioned earlier, which I found interesting, is that there is kind of too much focus on physical development, physical challenges, and I think it's been like that forever with cerebral palsy. But you know, it is the state of current healthcare. So what can parents do to kind of shift that focus to this holistic treatment and focus more on developmental challenges overall, as opposed to just the physical aspect? Is there any treatment that you find useful, or any organizations that you can direct parents to kind of get this holistic perspective as opposed to just physical only?
Well, let me say first of all that of course physical aspects of cerebral palsy, it's extremely important to address those. I would never say that they're not, you know, they shouldn't be right up there, because if you don't address those physical aspects in terms of posture and movement, you know, you're going to get a child with some very abnormal movement patterns, and that could potentially lead, you know, to serious immobility and pain. So we must always think about those. Absolutely. What I think is important is that we are aware of the way that all of those elements interconnect with child development, and particularly around things like sensory stimulation. The issue with cerebral palsy, which is a neurological impairment, is that it can influence the way that the brain interprets information from the world around and interacts with the world. So often children with cerebral palsy may experience a sensory deficit in terms of their awareness of movement or space or touch. And so one of the, and I've, in my experience, you know, one of the sort of reactions to a child with a motor impairment is to be a little bit frightened about encouraging them to move, you know, in terms of, if you think about a child with normal development, how much they naturally play and move or seek movement. And, you know, it's really important that every child, especially those children at risk of cerebral palsy, are exposed to all sorts of movement and rolling and moving in space. You know, their tactile systems, their sense of touch is stimulated, their movement, swinging, moving in space, going around, all of those things are developed just like any other child. And you know, and also things like communication and arousal. So a child that might have abnormal tone, for example, may appear to be under-aroused, or may have a sort of a startle reflex. So it's about sort of trying to normalize, trying to give those children experiences, very gentle experiences. And so I would sort of, where we're going with this is that I think it's really important to make sure you have an pediatric occupational therapist who really understands about those sorts of needs, around the needs of a child with a neurological impairment, and is really able to help you feel comfortable about playing, positioning, giving your child maximum access to really stimulating play, speech and language therapy, so that they can help you develop your child's communication systems and train you actually in how you can really encourage your child to communicate, to avoid issues around frustration, you know, behavioural issues which might come around as as a result of your child having problems with communication, and of course the physio. You were mentioning in some of your sort of preliminary work around the conductive education approach, and many families have found conductive education to be helpful. Again, it might not suit everybody.
Sorry, could you explain to anyone who's not familiar, what is conductive education, what are the principles, and how is it different from, regular NHS treatments that are offered right now? What is your take on it, essentially?
Well, I've worked with conductors for a long time. Conductors are professionals who are trained in conductive education. It is a graduate level training. Conductors would, I'm not a conductor myself, so I have to say that, but a conductor and conductive education is a system of learning. So it's about, as it says, it's an education which has which looks at a child with motoric issues or movement issues, but sees the whole child. So it has a focus on functionality. And helping children to become as functional as possible in their daily lives. So my take on conductive education is that it can bring a very helpful and valuable area of expertise. But I've always felt that conductive education is part of the bigger package. And should be viewed as that. So, if you have a child with cerebral palsy, you're going to have quite a variety of different people from across the healthcare, medical, therapeutic spectrum to support you. And conductive education can be part of that package. And I would certainly encourage parents to look into whether there is a local conductive education centre, simply to go and see for yourself. It may be for you, it may not be. And if nothing else, you will find professionals who, in those centres which provide conductive education, who will really understand cerebral palsy and will also be a source of emotional support for you as well. So again, it comes back to parents going out there, doing the research, looking at what's available, and making up their own minds about it.
I wanted to kind of get back to the political aspect of it, because I want to kind of make it center of the conversation. But before I do that, because we started talking about the difficulties that parents face. So with your experience working with children with cerebral palsy for such a long time, kind of what would you say parents struggle with the most? So is it the financial aspect? Is it the kind of health provision aspect? Is it finding support in peers? What is the main kind of issue, main problem that parents are faced with?
That's a really tricky one, isn't it? I think sometimes, and again, this is very subjective, but I think there can be a sense of isolation when you it becomes clear that your baby or your child has a special need. You can feel as though you're alone in this, and have that sort of sense of rising panic and anxiety. And I think that's why, as I said earlier, it might be very easy for me to say it, but if you can stay calm and talk to other people, so I think there's that potentially sense of isolation and anxiety that is overwhelming and natural. The other very, very obvious one, but I think a lot of people forget about, is fatigue, is exhaustion. It's mental fatigue and physical fatigue, because, on top of looking after, or you may have other children, just sort of thinking about the normal family life and running a family, you've also got to almost be your if you have a child with special educational needs, you have to be their PA in every sense of the word. You've got to be the person that is organising the appointments, that's filling up all of those forms, that's doing, looking for the equipment, getting everything in place. It is absolutely, it's knackering. And I've seen that, with a lot of our families who just say, I'm just exhausted with this. And then, of course, financially, we know, there's a lot of research out there which shows that how many families with children with disabilities, do suffer economic hardship as a result of that. And often because one parent has to give up full-time work, perhaps, in order to support the child with special needs. So yes, all of those things are there. And the sense of physical and mental well-being, and how do you sustain that? This recent period with COVID, I think, has really thrown that and highlighted that. So many families that have had or where the situation has demanded that children have been at home in the house, not going to school, and for many, many, many families with children with special needs, school is the lifeline, because it's the lifeline for the child, where they get their therapy, or they get their education, that everything is there for those few hours a day. The parents can have a period of time where they can get on and get things done. So my heart goes out to those families, and the resilience that they build is absolutely awe-inspiring. I just feel families with children with special needs just deserve all the support and admiration, because it is phenomenal what they do, and what they contribute to society through that care of their children. So I think that the issues are around mental and physical well-being for those families, but also very real anxieties around making ends meet, and the impact on their lifestyle of their family on having a child with a disability.
And as you also mentioned, it's very important to
Sorry.
it's very important to talk to other people, regardless of how hard it may seem, to share your story and not be ashamed of having a child with disability, even if you're talking to remote family members or relatives, friends. Don't hide your emotions, don't hide your experiences from others, because that will just build up. And emotional well-being of parents is really important. That's something that gets neglected in the whole conversation. So thank you for bringing that up, and encouraging everyone again to talk about their feelings. And it's all right to feel anxious, it's all right to not be okay sometimes, and just remember to share it with people, and learn to talk to people who don't have the same experience as you about this. It's going to help you, I'm sure.
Ask for
And
help. Just ask for help. And I know
yeah, exactly.
there'll be parents out there going, yeah, we're always asking for help, but and I know also, the role of families, the role of grandparents and extended families in support, and how important those networks are. So, as you say, why should you be ashamed of having a child with it's your child? Why? Nothing. That you are doing a fantastic job in supporting your child, and you will need help. Everybody needs help. Everyone needs help. You just have to ask for it, and maybe sometimes push if it's not forthcoming. And that, I find, certainly, you'll hear many families saying, it's a fight, and that is exhausting. But we do need to push sometimes for things, and to get the ball rolling, or perhaps to sort of chivvy people into to carrying through things that they said they'll do for you, because you can't do it all yourself. Anyway.
And another question concerning schools and returning back to schools or preschools, whatever it may be. What do you think is kind of the state of support available to parents and their children in nurseries, preschool, so before they actually get to school, because it's a very important stage to kind of prepare your child with a disability to enter that world?
Well, families with children with cerebral palsy will come from all sorts of different starting points. So there'll be those who, whose baby may have had issues from birth onwards and may already have a team supporting them. And again, I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier about, when you're thinking of putting your child into a nursery or looking for a nursery, start your homework early and make sure that you call on all of those sources of support, whether it's your local therapy team, or you do your research on the nursery itself to see how receptive they will be, and what sort of training that their early years practitioners have in special needs. You need to develop a very open, honest and trusting relationship with the nursery or childcare setting or childminder, one in which there can be sort of open exchange and sharing. They need to be honest with you about what they can and can't do. You need to be honest with them about what your expectations are. And again, get support from your child development team. Make sure that they do the necessary preparations. They need to be doing things like, risk assessments of the setting. They need to be talking to the staff there, making sure the equipment, if your child needs supportive equipment, whether it's, wedges, floor, sitters, seating, support with feeding, support with toileting, all of those things, you need to make sure it's much better to have it up and running and ready before the child starts, so that you're not sort of treading water or waiting for something to be in place before your child starts, because that can lead to frustration on both sides. So the relationship between the team, and when you've got a child with cerebral palsy, there's going to be many people you've got to deal with, and I say that in a nice way, that you'll be sharing this journey with, and it's really important that you nurture those relationships, that they are positive relationships. And it might be that sometimes you will feel frustrated and possibly angry about the situation, and that's where you need to feel that you are able to have those honest, straightforward but courteous conversations with those people that are going to be part of your child's life going forward, and always thinking ahead, because your like every child, your baby and your child will grow, and so you get your seating sorted for now, but in 6 months time you're going to need a different type of setup, because your child will grow just like every other child. So it's sort of thinking ahead and making sure you've got that that momentum going in terms of planning for your child's life.
But that brings us to discussing equipment and the difficulty of applying for grants for equipment and getting equipment in time, because as you said, you always need updated equipment because your child grows so fast. So do you have like any advice in situations where the waiting times are just too long and you cannot get appropriate equipment in time? Maybe some grants or organizations that can help parents to navigate the equipment space.
Again, word of caution, you always keep your therapy team in the loop when you're, because you need to get equipment that is right for your child, that is bespoke, if you like, for your child. It's really important that you work together to get that right. Having said that, if you have been through that assessment process and you know what you want in terms of equipment, yes, there are organisations out there who will help you fund that, particularly if it's for the home. If it's for the school, then that should really come from another budget. But if it's for the home, and you are struggling to get that piece of equipment allocated, then if you go onto our, you can go and look on the internet. There are lots of sites there that will say. But if you go onto our resource page of our website, www.actioncerebralpalsy.org, on our resource page, there is a list of charities there that you could approach for equipment. But again, it's about thinking ahead, because when you make an application to a charity, it can take some time for that to be processed. So, you know, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to apply for a piece of equipment and it's going to be in your home the next week. That's not going to happen. So it is, again, it's sort of thinking, you know, what do we need to have for my child, you know, within the next few months, and thinking ahead for that. You know,
the milestone that I mean, the recurring theme that we keep bringing up today is planning ahead, and it can get a bit stressful, I'm sure, because parents can, you know, not be used to this type of setting where they always have to think ahead and always plan for the next step. But I think that's one of the top skills that every parent who has a child with any type of disability needs. And yeah, especially with equipment, because the process can be very stressful. And as Amanda mentioned, they do have a resources page on their website, and we will link anything that we discussed today in an upcoming Facebook post. So feel free to visit their website. And also, just want to let everyone know that we are going to be posting some guides and sharing some branded guides that ActionCP have on their website on our forum. So look forward to that as well. It will be updated today. And I just wanted to finish up with one last question that I'm particularly curious about, because you produced this report called Variations in Care. And it was in 2019, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm just curious, how did the government respond to that particular piece of work? And um, what actions were committed since then? Like, what does this report entail?
yes, well, we launched that report in Westminster just shortly before lockdown in February this year, and we were able to present that to a number of key MPs in Westminster, and other stakeholders were there as well. And I'm really excited that we're hoping, as a result of that and the interest that was shown by some of the MPs, that we're going to be forming what's called an all-party parliamentary group on cerebral palsy, which I believe is the first ever, to look at this stage at, we want it to obviously become a timeline, because cerebral palsy is a lifelong condition, but particularly at this stage, at those very early months and years of life, and looking at the early identification and pathways of care. So although, and we will of course be using the evidence and the recommendation in that report on variations of care as the basis of our parliamentary group study on early intervention, along with other work done by other organisations who have, you know, parallel recommendations across the world of childhood disability, really, in terms of provision. So we want to pull all of that together, but the exciting thing is that this is an opportunity for us to ask very pertinent questions and to hold to those people that are in the position of being able to make change. This government has promised a change, has promised, well, they promised an end to austerity, but we shall see that. And we will be saying, as I said before, you know, we want an end to the rhetoric around disability and early intervention, and the start of action. So, perhaps Action Cerebral Palsy is a good term, but, we want to see action now, and we want to see a change for the better, so that children and babies born now can have a better future going forward, and that parents won't have to be, in fight mode, if you like, so much as they have had to, unfortunately, be in the past. We want the best opportunities for those families to be there as an entitlement, as a right across the country, wherever you live, rather than that being something that you may be fortunate to have or not, or otherwise not. So, that's what our focus of work for the next year or couple of years ahead, and I'm really feeling really excited about that. And I would love to say to people who may be listening to this, if you feel you've got something or a story you could help us with, or tell us, or have something, would like to talk to me about, your own personal experience around your child's early years, or if you have a young child now, please do get in touch, because we really want to be a voice for all of you, all of those families there with children with cerebral palsy, and make sure we represent those voices as much as we can in our work in Westminster.
And also congratulations on reaching that milestone and launching an all-parliamentary group. I think it's an amazing step, and I'm sure you will make a lot of progress with that. And I just wanted to thank you on behalf of all the families struggling for the work that you're doing. And yeah, we will make sure to promote your contact details so that people can get in touch for whatever questions they may have, or to share their story about early development. So yeah, I think we're gonna wrap up now. So thank you to everyone who is watching the live right now, or who is watching the recording. And yeah, thank you so much, Amanda. It was very insightful, and we hope to stay in touch with your charity
Great. Well,
and work together.
thank you for the opportunity. It's been great.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Bye-bye.